Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping bits and pieces before we get going. As you can see on the right-hand side, there is a chats feature. Feel free to do questions into the chat as we go, and we will be monitoring that chat flow, and we'll answer the questions as they come in. We are 10 seconds ahead. So if we do say anything with regards to asking questions, please bear in mind that we are 10 seconds ahead of the audience. And then if there is any technical problems, there is a panic button right at the top of my screen, and it generates a new room. So if we do have any technical problems, we will do that. I will pass over to Luke, who is your host today. Luke, are you all good?
All good. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thanks for finding some time this afternoon to come and join us on one of our Spotlight series of case study webinars. So today we're joined by the wonderful team from ICMP, and we'll do some introductions in a minute to let you know who everyone is and the subject matter experts that we've got in the room. It's a very sort of informal webinar, so like Ryan said, and we've got the chat feature going on the right-hand side. It's your opportunity to ask questions. We'll go through the conversation today. Hopefully, a very rich conversation with some useful content for all of those that have joined to explore the project. We'll polish off some of those questions at the end to allow the conversation to flow. And with that, we'll kick off. So. Few introductions. So pleased to meet everyone, albeit virtually. My name is Luke Holdcroft Young. I'm sales director here at Academia. I'm responsible for our education team, amongst others. And we have the wonderful team from ICMP. So Paul, if I pass over to you in no particular order, I'll just go around the room. If you'd just like to introduce yourself and what you do for ICMP, please.
Yeah, I'm Paul Kirkham. I'm Chief Executive at ICMP.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. John, no particular order. You're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm John McDonald. I'm the IT manager at ICMP.
Thanks, John. And last but not least, Tony, please.
Hello there. I'm Tony Harris. I'm the Dean at ICMP, so I have oversight of all of our academic provision.
Perfect. Thanks ever so much. So ICMP, Paul, would you like to explain to the audience today who ICMP are and what you're all about?
Yeah, we're a relatively small independent provider. We've got just over 1,000 students across 7 undergraduate and 3 postgraduate degree courses, plus a little HNC and some part-time courses in our offer. We've actually been around for about 30 years. Started off as a very small guitar and bass school back in the 80s, and I came in from 2003 and took over as chief executive at that stage. It was still very small at that time, no more than 100, 120 students, something like that. And we've been building it up ever since, basically. And we're now obviously completely registered with the Office for Students. We're just undergoing DAPS, just finished the scrutiny period for DAPS, so we're optimistic that this summer we'll be awarded our own degree awarding powers, which is a huge step for us. We're located in northwest London, in Kilburn. We have 2 buildings there. We've just taken on an additional building. So we have 2 campuses, which are composed of specialist performance rooms, studios, recording facilities, teaching rooms, all those kinds of spaces. We teach contemporary music. So that's us.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. And if I can just hand to you, Tony, if you can just delve into a little bit more detail about the qualifications that you guys offer.
Okay, so yeah, we have a full suite of undergrad and postgrad and programs, all within the commercial music industry sphere. So that covers all aspects of performance, creative musicianship, songwriting, production, audio engineering, music for film, TV and games, music business and entrepreneurship. And we also have a suite of evening courses, part-time courses, summer schools, those kind of some of the non-accredited provision. And the idea is that we represent the full ecosystem of the music industry, but sort of all within one safe space of ICMP. So our students not only sort of develop the skills they need within their particular areas of specialism and expertise, but also begin to understand how all those different facets of the industry connect together, and how the networking within that industry works. By the time they graduate from ICMP and go out into the big wide world, they're familiar with how all aspects of the industry fit together.
Brilliant. Okay, very good intro and insight. So thanks ever so much for that. And what we're here to talk about today is how ICMP managed that transition to blended learning. We're looking to explore what the initial challenges were that you guys set out to solve, and just to explore that journey in a little bit more depth, really. So Paul, if I hand over to you, can you tell us about what the initial challenges that you guys faced? It's undoubtedly been a time of immense challenge for educators over the last 18 months as a result of the pandemic, and that, I dare say, rapidly accelerated some of your plans to do some of this anyway. But if we can talk about your journey to blended learning, what was the challenge you were setting out to solve?
I think it's been a challenge for everybody, not just educators, hasn't it, over the last 12 months or so? It's really easy to forget now. We are 14 months in, 15 months in to this different way of living, this different way of working, obeying governmental decrees, sanitizing everything right, left and center, not hugging anybody. And it's really easy to forget what this felt like back in February and March of 2020. And the other day, we have a really active crisis management team and a whole business recovery plan, and that whole process kicked in. And so, and we're still basically consider ourselves to be in crisis. So that team still meets and still keeps minutes. And the other day, I was looking back through the minutes that we kept from back in March, April of last year, and you were basically looking at potential Armageddon. Because nobody had any lived experience of working under pandemic conditions, and we were immediately up against all sorts of technical challenges, logistical challenges, human challenges, emotional challenges. Everybody was sent home, and I'm sure Tony will tell you a little bit more later on. In the space of probably 5 days, we went from almost complete denial. This is not going to happen. And by the way, if it does, there's no way we can move everything online, to, okay, this has happened. We are now moving everything online. And I think that process it was about 5 days in early March. I forget the dates exactly now. And then it was about a 3-day transition to actually shift everything into online delivery mode. And all the time that's happening, you are communicating with staff, you are communicating with students, you are communicating with their parents, with a whole range of stakeholders, and trying to reassure everybody. And everybody, of course, is in their own personal situation, their personal panic, desperately seeking out toilet roll or flour or whatever it was they were all bloody buying from the supermarkets at that time. So it's quite useful sometimes just to sit and reflect and try to recall what that was like, because that was the backdrop against which we were making really, really proactive decisions. And, one of the advantages, I think, of being a relatively small, very agile provider is that we were able to make decisions really quickly, because, we didn't have to go through committees X, Y, and Z. We could move very, very quickly and get things done quite quickly. And we put into place a number of things. Core to it is people. You can have the best crisis management plan, you can have the best procedures, and you can rehearse it all. And we did 6 months prior. We had rehearsed all our procedures, but it doesn't make any difference unless you've got the right people with the right kind of flexibility. All those plans go out the window, and you just have to deal with what's in front of you all of the time. So, we had teams focused on running scenarios. What do the finances look like over the next 3 to 6 months? Give me a worst case. Our worst case was pretty much Armageddon. It was returning to a shell of a business, basically. 40% of our students, give or take, are non-UK students. So, in March, April, you're thinking, well, they're not going to come here, are they? I mean, nobody's traveling. Everything was grounded. So you're suddenly looking at 50% reduction in students. You're imagining that your second and third years are not going to return. You're imagining potentially you're in a world of compensation or a world of, God knows what. And you've still got all the bills to pay. So we figured, one team needed to sort out the finances, so we moved really quickly to get to ensure that we had enough cash in the tank for at least a 12-month period, because we could see this was going to go on for some time quite quickly. And then we had the technical challenges, which I'll hand over to colleagues in a minute, of, how do you shift to online? And I think everybody who's ever experienced online provision knows that what we did was not online provision. What we did was basically a sort of a Heath Robinson job, lots of gaffer tape and sticking plaster to ensure that we could actually teach out the semester and finish doing what we're doing. In many ways, I think it was the best time for it to happen, if it were going to happen, because it was right at the tail end of the semester. So, the academics, they had plenty of evidence that they could use. There were plenty of things we could do to ensure that existing students completed. But what we couldn't necessarily do is guarantee that we could continue to deliver online beyond the immediate sort of 2 to 3 weeks of sticking plaster approach. So immediately we had a team, what we call a TEL team, Technology Enhanced Learning team. We brought in expertise, we brought in advisors, and we made very early, very conscious decisions to make quite significant investments. We're not a well-endowed institution. We don't have a large balance sheet. We have very little funding outside of the student loan funding. We don't have teaching grant. We don't have we don't have benefactors and that sort of thing. So, we had to move very, very quickly, and we made very conscious decisions not to worry about the bottom line for the next 12 months, not to worry about too much about whether or not we were going to be, continuing with certain plans and what have you, but just to ensure that we could actually get through to the next 3 to 6 months. And part of that was technical. So we put the team together, and then they started to think about, right, what are we going to need from September? And we started that thinking very, very early on.
The A team, by the sounds of it. So Paul, just to start digging into some of those points in a little bit more detail, and I'll look to you, Tony, to contribute here, if I may. We mentioned at the start that yes, unprecedented times, challenges for everybody, not only educators, to do what you've always done and rapidly move that into an online delivery model. To touch on a point that that you made in the introduction about how ICMP operate, by the very nature of the types of courses that you deliver, the facilities that you run, and of course, as part of that, to pick up on Tony's point about offering your students industry relevant experience, the facilities that you operate, the recording studios, the music and media ICT labs, they're specialist facilities. So the additional challenge that you guys had in moving to blended learning is, how do you do that with facilities that are specialist in their nature, and to give students that very, very high quality of teaching and learning? And I suppose, Tony, that's where I look to you to talk to us in a little bit more detail about the solution you put together to take what you were doing on premise into the blended world.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we've learned actually over this is the relationship between the physical space and teaching and learning is quite different from what we may have thought it was before the pandemic, because actually the physical space, the specialist facilities, are the spaces in which the students apply what they have learnt. And actually what we quickly found, and the reason why we were able to switch relatively seamlessly to teaching and learning in the virtual space, is that actually a lot of the teaching and learning can happen outside of the specialist facility. And where ICMP worked best actually during the pandemic were those periods where we were in sort of semi-lockdown, where teaching was online, but we were able to manage restricted access to the sites. And so students were still able to apply what they learnt in the specialist facility, with us supporting that through teaching and learning online. So, I mean, that initial switch, it was less than 5 days, Paul. I think it was 3 from what I remember. We made the decision on the Tuesday, and the first online teaching began on the Friday of that week. And I was one of the naysayers. I was one of the ones who were saying, no, this can't possibly be done. And then I think it was John who pointed out, we have the platforms, we have Teams, which at that point I don't think I'd even heard of, let alone used. And we have Canvas, which is our VLE. The academic team were telling me, which I already knew, we were already pretty good on Canvas. We're probably not exploiting it back then as much as we could be, but we know what it's capable of, and we have that tool at our disposal. And, as a faculty of academics, people aren't scared of using it, and it's already reasonably well developed. And then when we started looking at every program by module, and you start to assess, well, actually that module works really well online because it's basically just classroom teaching, which can easily be replicated within Teams. Certain aspects of the music tech provision, of course, is software based. So as long as you've got the software on a computer, you're able to pretty much replicate what was happening in the physical space. So by not having to, adapt your teaching too much, big chunks of the teaching moved relatively straightforwardly into a combination of using Canvas for materials and so on, and Teams for the live contact with students. And that left actually a relatively small part of the curriculum that represented more of a challenge. And that was mostly to do with the very specialist facilities, for instance, recording studios, where the physical sonic environment is critical for mixing and recording of instruments and so on. And the biggest challenge, which was never 100% resolved, was around live, particularly live ensemble performance. And because at the moment we just do not have commercially available low latency software that allows you to really replicate that kind of ensemble performance. But the interesting point, of course, is that the entire music industry were facing exactly the same challenge at exactly the same time. We very quickly picked up on, I mean, you'll remember very early on in the pandemic, the explosion of online concerts and stuff that was happening, and gigs on driveways and all that kind of stuff was starting to happen. And that really gave us a lifeline for adapting, reinterpreting performance, particularly around assessment activity that student needed to engage in, simply replicating the kind of performance activity that was already emerging in the industry. So that combination of moving the easy stuff online, adapting the relative, the less troublesome stuff into new formats online, and then reinterpreting what recording is all about and what performance is all about, and adapting our assessments to match that, allowed us to move very quickly and to get through, well, the remainder of last academic year and now pretty much the whole of this academic year, without, I don't think, us having to make any major modifications to any of our modules. Which certainly came as a surprise to me, given the naysayer position I was in sort of 14 months ago.
So a big project from IT to get that to go. And I suppose, like you say, you had some of the elements of the solution in the platform, in the software, and some of the approach was available to transition. So if I sort of come to you next, John, just to talk about from an IT perspective how you started to pull that all together. Obviously, the platform, the software needed that endpoint, needed that device that needed to go into the hands of the students. So what did you look to in terms of that solution to make this all work?
Yeah, one of the main things that we do is remove barriers between the students and getting their reward. And obviously the pandemic itself introduced a series of more barriers, particularly access to our tech rooms and the software. So we engaged with academia, and we set up a MacBook loan scheme for the students. We also engaged with MDM Solutions on loaning students software. We got some temporary staff in to man the phones and become IT support for everybody for everything, because it wasn't just the students at this point. It was everybody needing support to work remotely. We had remote software so that we could dial into people's computers and do what was necessary from a distance. We loaned many laptops, but yeah, the real good signifier of our intent to get us through the issues with the students was MacBook loan scheme and the software loans.
And how many MacBooks were deployed to students, John, as part of the program?
I believe it was 350 or thereabouts.
So 350 MacBook Pros in the hands of the students to deliver working in this new way. Tony, if I can just come back to you, because I think actually just listening to you articulate the challenge that was actually facing the industry, and going back to your original point about offering students the ability to work in the way that the industry does now. What benefits did you see as a result of putting a piece of industry standard hardware in the MacBook Pro, equipped with the software that you guys run to deliver your courses? What benefit did you see to student experience as a result of giving them that solution?
Well, I mean, the benefit of the way recording studios work today is that the vast majority of it is in the box. It does sit in the computer, and essentially all the large format recording studio gives you is the acoustic environment to do certain things that you can't do on a laptop sitting in your bedroom. You need a properly acoustically treated room to mix properly, and you need a suitable space to be able to record things like a drum kit. But the vast majority of what our production students would do in a recording studio is done in the Mac anyway. So by using the laptop loan scheme, we were essentially able to replicate the systems that they were using in the physical space, and do that remotely, on their MacBooks. And then what we were able to do in terms of the curriculum is just rearrange the curriculum. So those aspects, for instance, miking up a drum kit, which isn't something you can easily do in your bedroom, we'll shift that to a part of the program where we do have access to the site. So huge benefit to the student. And of course, it's also a reality of the recording industry is that large format studios are on the decline. It's not the main mode of production that is dominant in the industry today. The vast majority of producers, particularly those working in the more electronic fields of music, are not studio-based engineers. They're laptop software-based engineers. And actually all they need is a laptop and a pair of decent speakers and a good microphone for vocals. And that is exactly the kind of kit we were able to resource our students with. So we will have had production students who've gone through the entirety of their degree, and all of their portfolio work has probably been created on a laptop, one microphone and a pair of decent speakers without the requirement for large format studios.
And what was the sort of immediate sort of impact to student experience as a result of that? Did you get feedback from students about that provision?
Yes. Sorry, Paul, you were going to come in then?
No, you go ahead first, Tony, then I'll jump in with a couple of things.
Yeah, I mean, the sense of community was, I think, one of the biggest challenges for places like us. We're particularly proud at ICMP of the sense of community that we create, and it's something that our students really value. And clearly that was going to be a challenge. We had, imagine being an international student holed up in London in a tiny bedsit, not really knowing very many people and having nowhere that you could access. So we did a lot of work with our wellbeing team to make sure that we were reaching out to these students who are in particularly difficult circumstances. We've got a fantastic events team who never stopped working throughout the pandemic. They did exactly what we did within the academic team, which is just reinvent all the stuff that they would have been doing in pubs in Camden in the online space. There was a real sort of rich program of virtual events. Clearly, it's not. There was something missing. It's not quite the same as getting a group of musicians in a room and making a loud noise together. And that was something that the students were frustrated by. But that was that's something that society was frustrated by. It wasn't unique to ICMP.
Yeah, if I can just add in there's a couple of other aspects to this this approach as well. And I mentioned early on, we put the crisis management team together. We started making early decisions. We looked at projections, we looked at finances, we made decisions to invest in technology. But we were also very clear that this was going to be very difficult for staff and for students emotionally, personally. They, family concerns. I mean, you're talking about plague, death, not being able to see your granny. I mean, these are quite big things. So early on, we took decisions that, ICMP was, if you like, going to become an anchor point that they could rely on, whether they were a student or a staff member. Whatever else was going on in their lives, they would be able to rely on us. And that meant, really enhancing things like wellbeing and counseling support, providing lots and lots of information all the time, regular online staff meetings, with all senior managers, led by me, student forums where we would hold town halls basically online on a regular basis. Engagement of the student representatives and the student presidents, involving them in the planning processes so that they were actually, quite consciously and practically involved in what was going to happen in terms of the September delivery and beyond. So we made really conscious decisions around that, that we were going to provide that support. And where things like the laptop loan scheme, but also a lot of the other loan schemes, we doubled or tripled probably the hardship fund that we had available, and just made it more accessible. But that was meant both as an overt support for need, but also as a slightly more covert message, which is, we are here to support you. You can rely on us. We will tell you what's going on. There will be no BS, from this institution. This is the way it is. And the final point I would make around this as well, as an institution governed by, consumer marketing legislation and contract law, we were very clear from the beginning. We didn't need the OFS to shout at us about this. We were very clear from the beginning that we had a contractual obligation to our students. And so we immediately started to look at where we might fail in terms of delivering what we'd promised, and where we might be, exposed in terms of not just legal challenge, not just compensation claims, but also in terms of reputational damage. And we've seen one or two institutions up and down the country who didn't pay much attention to that, and they have suffered reputational damage. And so we were very clear about those things, and we were very clear over the summer about, this is what we will be able to offer under, we called it our 4-stage plan, from complete lockdown right through to complete face-to-face. This is what you will be able to offer. And so the recontracting process that happens over the summer months, the confirm a place process, we made it really, really clear and transparent to students, and just kept emphasizing that this was what was going to happen under all of these scenarios. Are you okay with that? So we had, we have one eye on the consumer marketing legislation. We had a really big focus on both staff and students, making them feel like they could rely on us. This was a really, really important part of everything we did, whether it was technical or financial or physical. We had to have that emotional provision, that emotional support, and that aspect of what we did.
Yeah, and I think you touched on some really important things there, and one of those being and we saw this across the education sector as a result of the pandemic, is how educators and how institutions were going to tackle this kind of digital divide. How do you cater for students that have and students that have not? And if we can explore in relation to what you were saying about the hardship funds, how you made everything equitable for your students, how did the MacBook loan scheme aid that, Paul?
Well, I think actually everything we did probably only partially resolved it, because it's all very well for someone like me sitting there in North London, nice sort of middle class household. I've got a nice space behind me. I can close the door. There's a nice garden. It is a very, very different kind of existence to what a student might be experiencing. In a low life bed sit somewhere, what an international student might be experiencing, having come over here for the first time, suddenly being stuck in a city they don't know and not being able to engage with anybody. So, people have got very, very different circumstances. So while the MacBook loan scheme and, loaning out or giving software and giving funds for things like maybe you had a broadband connection problem wherever you're living, or maybe you need a dongle to be able to access internet, or maybe you just need help paying the rent, whatever it happened to be. So we could provide all of that. And I think that was really quite well done. And there was a very conscious effort to ensure all that was provided. But what you can't do is you can't give those individuals the space and the time in which to use it. And so they might be stuck in a very, very difficult living environment. And so that is probably a piece of the puzzle that, we'll talk about the future, no doubt, in a few minutes. But in the future, a key piece of the puzzle, I think, is going to be providing workspace, study space, physical space where individuals can actually get away from whatever their living circumstances are. And some of them are abusive, some of them are in abusive circumstances. They'll be able to get away and actually have the space. And that actually is the one piece of the puzzle, I think, that requires a lot more thought, because, let's say, you can give people the hardware, you can give them the software, you can give them the support, you can give them the money, but if you can't give them the space in which to use all of that, then they're not going to be able to achieve.
Yeah, definitely, and I think this bridges quite nicely in where I wanted to sort of take the conversation sort of next is that idea of physical space. And we saw again education institutions up and down the land that were used to delivery of their courses in your static fixed media ICT lab, and you'd go into a university or a college or a school, and the setup was often the same. You would go into a specialist media lab, and it would be rows and rows of desktop computer with desks and seats, and a member of staff at the front delivering that provision. How did that compare to the setup at ICMP? And if I talk to you about this, Tony, then what this will lead us into, we spent a lot of time talking about student. What about the staff and the transition of how they went from that media sort of lab to sort of remote blended learning with MacBook?
Just before Tony comments on that, we're obviously starting to go back to the office now, and I was in there the other week, and I was just sitting, and there weren't many people, and the top floor of our building is basically, the administration offices, and I sat there and I looked at, the rows of base stations basically and chairs, and it felt like I was looking backwards in time. It felt like I was looking for a relic from a different age, because clearly that way of working for staff is no longer going to be normal, is no longer going to be acceptable, and frankly is no longer going to be particularly productive. So, what was beginning the movement towards more flexible working, the movement towards, things you saw in cool Silicon Valley style setups, I mean, clearly that's going to be part of the future. But Tony, you can, I'm sure, say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky at ICMP for a start that, our faculty are very keen to, they're very progressive. They want to do things differently. We don't suffer from what some universities do with sort of an old guard who are resistant to any kind of change. We're not that type of institution. So we didn't suffer from that. But of course, across our faculty, and we're working with 80, 90 industry practitioners, there was a real range of experience and confidence and competence with making that switch. So we had some tutors who'd been working on online modes for a very long time, and very quickly were switching to multi-camera setups and doing some really quite sophisticated stuff with very little sort of input from ICMP, because they already had the technical capacity to manage that. Other tutors, myself included, this was the first time we'd really engaged in online learning. So we put on quite a lot of support sessions. We had a whole conference day related to online learning at the beginning of the academic year, various sort of resources that we've made available for staff, and seminars throughout the years. You can imagine a lot of our focus around our learning and teaching and our professional development has been around online pedagogy and so on. So we've done what we can to support the staff, and faculty have pretty much taken to it. They see the value of it, and what they're recognizing now is, as we're moving out of pandemic, is what we can take from what we've learned and how we can continue in a permanent way with quite a lot of this activity, but then also get increasingly better. Now we're able to get back in the building and engaging face to face. Now we're at the really interesting point of discussing that interface between face to face and online, and the possibility that gives us for a much greater flexibility in the way that we provide for an increasingly diverse set of students. And it reminds me, I had a conversation with a student a couple of years back, way before the pandemic, and this was a student who was having some difficulty in completing assessment work because she was working alongside studying. And in the meeting, I made the point that she's on a full-time program, and perhaps expecting to be able to take on as much work as she was doing alongside that wasn't appropriate. And she got really cross with me, saying, she has to work so she can pay her rent and complete her studies. And it's the fault of our program for not being flexible enough to allow for that. And she was absolutely right. I sort of put it in a quiet corner of my mind, thinking we're going to need to revisit that at some point. And actually this pandemic has given us the opportunity to revisit that, because she's absolutely right. And one of the challenges of the HE model in the UK is that it's predicated on a model which is biased towards a particular type of student who goes away to university for 3 years, who lives on campus, who's probably bankrolled by mom and dad. And actually, some of our students fit that mold, but many of our students don't. They have quite complex personal lives and families, and they have to work in order to be able to complete their studies. And, the 3 or 4 days a week on site model doesn't work for that type of students. So I'm really interested now in the learning of the last 12 months. How can that facilitate greater flexibility for the benefit of the student?
And Luke, I like just to say one thing. I like to think that there's a bit of a cultural shift has happened here, and I like to think that the sector, perhaps not the sector more generally, but some in the sector might see this as an opportunity, because we've been trying to get a little online project off the ground for a number of years and failing miserably. And I could never understand why you got a whole generation of people who are doing everything online apart from their education, and why everything was suddenly extremely flexible. You know, I can be out walking, you know, the dog in the morning, and I can be doing my shopping, you know, at the same time on the mobile. I never understood why education was not moving in this direction, because clearly there are some technical challenges around, you know, synchronous versus asynchronous learning and assessment, etc. But this is entirely possible. And, you know, even this, we're sitting here, this is now second nature to be having a conference and talking to people and, you know, not quite making eye contact because I'm looking at the camera, because that kind of makes eye contact with you. But all of this is coming second nature to us now. So there's a cultural shift here. And I think this is the opportunity. The pandemic has really given this opportunity to take advantage of that shift in people's expectations. And Tony's right. You know, we have to fragment higher education and deliver in flexible ways across different modes. There's no doubt in my mind that that's the future.
Absolutely, and to sort of bridge the conversation between both yourself, Paul, and some of the points that Tony raised, so poignantly, is that the world is changing. You know, you say Silicon Valley, you know, that's what the ultimate modern workplace looks like now. You know, it's working from anywhere at any time, and especially when you get into the creative sphere, you know, creatives want to be able to create at any time of the day. You know, it shouldn't necessarily be bound by the 9 to 5. So, you know, have you seen the impact of that in terms of being able to offer that now through the loan scheme, through moving to blended learning? Are you seeing that students' attendance is still there, even though they might not necessarily be jumping on the bus and commuting to faculty? And
yes, we are, and you know, very much in the play now. We're in a slightly different situation because we're externally validated at the moment. I said at the beginning we're going through our own awarding powers, but we kind of have to revert back to type for a short period of time, because our awarding body, our university partner and validation agreement, doesn't allow us really at the moment to be flexible. But part of the strategy is to gain our own awarding powers, which will then enable us to be much more flexible in terms of what we deliver and what we credit going forward. And, you know, breaking courses down into more bite-sized chunks and awarding credit and allowing students to build up their credit portfolios flexibly over time is undoubtedly the way forward. And hopefully we'll get a more flexible financing system to help them to do that. So we're now planning, we're now thinking around that. We are, you know, literally reworking our 5 to 10 year strategic plan and thinking, right, what does that look like? And in order to get to that point where you can basically say to a student, here's your course, how would you like us to deliver it to you? You know, how do you get to that point? And I think the winners will be those who can do that, and those who can offer a mix of pure online, pure blended, pure face-to-face, based on student need. Clearly, there will be certain parameters and certain limitations around that. They will be the winners, and that's how I believe we go from 50% participation to 75% participation, is by providing that flexibility.
Absolutely, and so many relevant points and mentioned there. In the interest of time, and we want to allow. There's been some questions coming through from the through the chat channels. I just wanted to talk about happy accidents. So I think we started to talk about it just then. You know, as a result of having to go through such rapid digital transformation to move online, it's now opened up, you know, a realm of possibility to you guys to change how you're doing things, all for the benefit of students and staff and learning and outcome, as a result of that rapid digital transformation. What other happy accidents has ICMP seen as a result of this switch?
I think there are two, and Tony will have some more, you know, that I've just mentioned. I think the big happy accident is that you can now have a sensible conversation about delivering online and blended learning, and people aren't looking aghast and saying, "Oh, that's not possible. You can't possibly do that." I mean, you know, without the pandemic, you'd still be trying to convince people who didn't want to do it. And perhaps the second happy accident, and Tony, maybe you can comment on it, is he's right. We do have progressive, you know, academics and tutors and industry professionals, but you know, technology enhanced learning is a particular skill set, and the online pedagogy is different in some ways to the classroom pedagogy, and there seems to be an acceptance of that now. there seems to be a willingness to actually engage with a different approach to the development and delivery of good pedagogical content. So I think the biggest happy accident for me is that those barriers are breaking down, and people are starting to think about the opportunities. Tony, you may have something to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, one simple thing is the number of guests we've been able to bring in virtually.
Yeah,
which I can't believe we hadn't thought of this before. But of course, now you no longer have to fly them in from LA and put them in an expensive hotel. You can get much more high-profile guests, and it's just much more normal to have masterclasses online.
I've literally just booked somebody for our board away day in June who, previously it would have been flights in from Germany, it would have been hotel stays, it would have been fitting that into a whole agenda, it would have been cost. You know what? Come and do a 1-hour Zoom and we'll have an interaction. I mean, why were we not doing that before?
Yeah. And there's aspects of our teaching and learning, which, now in hindsight, you think, why were we ever expecting students to trek halfway across London for the sake of a 1-hour one-to-one dissertation supervision? And our students are telling us now loud and clear that there are certain aspects, such as supervisions, that they want to see permanently migrate online, and even some of the small group seminars. And we don't do that much sort of formal lecture stuff, but if it really is just sitting in a room listening to someone speak, then the students would rather be doing that online because they've got the flexibility around that. And that great benefit to us, because of course we're not tying up specialist rooms with stuff that can happen online. And I suppose sort of the direction we are going in now is what I would like to see is, if it's happening in the building, it should be the kind of activity that can only happen in the building because of the specialist nature of the space. Students are far more likely to be attending that kind of session because it's the only way they can access that part of the program, by being in the physical space with other people working collaboratively. And then the stuff that can happen online to support that activity in the specialist space can happen online, and the students are very happy with that kind of way of with that direction of travel. They don't want to give up face-to-face. Absolutely, they're absolutely committed to that. The importance of working collaboratively and being in the same room as other humans is absolutely critical on creative and practical programs. But whether they want to be on site 3 or 4 days a week doing that is another matter. Engagement and attendance has actually been up since we've been working in the online mode, particularly at 9 o'clock in the morning, but maybe because they haven't been able to go out at night, but also because travel, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting students are lazy, but it's expensive to get to Kilburn for 9 o'clock in the morning, and they're on limited budgets, and so there's all those sort of things going on in the background that this now allows us to create a mode of delivery which just better suits the modern student.
Perfect. Thanks ever so much. And John, just to ask the same question really from an IT perspective, has there been any happy accidents that you've observed from an IT stance as a result of changing it up?
I think so. I think the students, particularly the ones that had the MacBooks, have really appreciated having them 24/7. There's a lot of extra creativity that's gone on for those students. They've been really pleased with it. We were also able to reach a lot of students. I think someone asked about whether we were giving software to students outside of the MacBook loan scheme, and yes, we did. We enrolled them in our MDM so that we could do so. And so, a lot of students had the ability to continue their creativity outside of the parameters of access to a tech room, which is always going to be limited because classes have to go on at certain times and we have to close the building sooner or later, although we did recently do 24 hours. It's really good for the students, I think.
And we've seen this from other organisations. From a licensing perspective, when you operate a scheme as a loan, the asset is essentially the property of you guys, which means you can license that machine with any licensing that applies, to you as a site, as an enterprise sort of license agreement. If the students are bringing their own device, you would have to rely on the student bringing their own software, whereas from a licensing perspective, if it's your asset, if it's your device, there's oftentimes happy accidents there because you can then provision your full scope of software to that device because you own the licenses for it. So some very, very good content there. And just I was conscious to leave some time at the end for questions. And I can see that we've had some coming through on the chat. So I'll see if I can get to get to some of these. So a question from Richard. Can you explain the laptop loan scheme specifically in terms of cost and insurance? So potentially a question for you, Paul. You mentioned in terms of looking at...
I think it's more a question for you, isn't it, Luke? You can answer that.
I was just going to say, in terms of balancing the books and looking at finances, the loan scheme that you operated, safe to say that was purchased from ICMP capital funds.
Yeah, correct. I mean, to a certain degree, and I'll be quite honest here, this is still a little bit of an unknown because, of course, you rely on getting those machines back at the end of the loan period, and 3 years in the student's hands. So we don't know how many are going to come back, damaged or whatever. But you have to sort of factor that in, and how much of that hardware can then subsequently be recycled and what its value is. I mean, those are still unknowns because we're still at the front end of this scheme. But I think, you can evaluate something in terms of hard cost. I can't remember the details around insurance. I can't remember. I think they fit under our existing insurance scheme. I don't think we had any increase in premiums. I think it all just fitted nicely into the insurance we already had in place. But we didn't really look at it in terms of, the financials. We looked at it in terms of the bigger picture, in terms of what it was providing for the student experience, and the student's relationship with ICMP.
So thanks ever so much for that, Paul, and just to build on it from a bit of experience our side and how we see other institutions running similar programs, and to delve into your question a little bit more, Richard, you typically find that with especially Mac as a solution, that the residual value of a Mac is so high after a 3-year program that for an organization to go and make that investment into Mac, offer that as a loan pool and replenish it every 3 years, the high residual value of the Mac after the 3-year period of the organization running the loan will be so strong that when you pull that residual value back in, it really does bring down the cost of acquisition on that device. So there's some very intuitive sort of funding models that you can use to leverage the high residual value of Mac to fund the loan scheme, and we can provide more detail on that. So a question from Anthony Rayner: is the laptop loan scheme a one-to-one deployment? Do the students have admin rights? So maybe a question there for John. Is it that the student takes the device on a longer term loan basis and it becomes their device and they log into it, or are they checking it in and checking it out? How do you manage that process?
The students, we loan them their MacBooks for the duration of their study. So if they were to intermit or leave their studies, then we have to have it back. But we intended to give it to them for the entire duration of their studies. It was one-to-one. And yes, they have admin rights. Sorry, Anthony. Yes, they have admin rights on the MacBook. So it's logged into our MDM solution. So they can install and sign up to their own iTunes account.
Perfect. Thanks very much for that, John. And then Anthony, just to build on that, most of the time when laptops are provisioned as sort of one-to-one, we would always recommend robust MDM policy to sit alongside that to manage what access the student does have, what they can install, how they can self-support as well. And a good MDM solution and some service and support around that will make that very, very light touch to deploy, light touch to manage from an IT perspective. So a question from Drew over at Cardiff. Did you have a method for students to dock the MacBook with the studio equipment if they wanted to physically work in the studio? So that's potentially a really good question about looking forward and some of the facilities that you've got. So I'll hand over to the ICMP team to answer that one.
John, I think that's you again, isn't it?
Yeah, we do have, Sean has specifically set up some USB plugs available for students to be able to dock their own MacBooks. So yeah.
Perfect.
And of course, the software is identical across the systems, so they can just load up their file, their sessions into the studio machines if they need to.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much. A question from Richard over at Bath Spa. I think you mentioned you have around 1,000 students and you loaned 350 MacBooks. Does this mean you were able to install software on students' personal machines?
I'll let John answer this one, but bear in mind that not all students needed all the software that we're offering, because the production students obviously quite heavy on certain kinds of software that they needed, but many of our performance students said they may not have needed it. But John, perhaps you can address that in more detail.
Yeah. As Paul says, we weren't just throwing things at students. We were giving what was appropriate for their studies. So business students didn't need Logic, for example. But if in the event that someone already had their own MacBook but didn't have a copy of Logic, and that was needed for their studies, then yes, we made it available to them, so they would sign up to our MDM, just send them a config profile.
Thank you ever so much, John. I think I'm just checking that is all from the questions that have come in through the chat. We'll maybe give it a couple more minutes just to see if any more come through. But just from me, guys, thank you ever so much for taking the time out today to talk through the project and to talk through the journey and how ICMP managed the transition from how you were operating to blended learning. I hope there's been some useful content in there for our guests today. I know certainly every time we have a conversation, there's always something else that comes out of it that perhaps we hadn't discussed before, or perhaps has come to light since we last caught up. So what I would say to everybody off the back of today, we will be recording, or we have recorded the session. We'll be making the recording available to look back. We'll be sharing contact details for the team at Academia. If there was any questions that did pop up that you didn't get a chance to ask today, or you leave today thinking, I wish I'd asked just one more thing, then you know where we'll be. We'll be happy to field some of those. And I think that's it for today. So Ryan, I can see you've just jumped back on.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, guys. There's just one more question just popped in. I don't know if you saw that. It's just around providing covers to protect Macs.
I don't think we did we, John?
No, we didn't. There was the opportunity. I'm sure Academia can help you out with that more. To set up a store at the beginning, where we were going to set up recommended items for sale and availability. But to be honest, everything happened a little bit too quickly for us to get that in place at the beginning. So, I mean, if you were going to do this longer term, that would be a good option.
Yeah, definitely. We can pick that up with you, Anthony, off the after the webinar, so we can contact you and discuss further. More than happy to help. But yeah, huge thank you from me. Really fantastic webinar. Really appreciate your time, and I hope everyone has a lovely afternoon. I will play the out video. Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, ICMP team.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.